I have waited tables for the last 3 years. During my shift last night, a group of 4 women in their late 20s came in. They were a pleasure to have as customers. They ordered 4 of our house cocktails to start with and then went over the menu for their entrees. Then I was on my way back to their booth with the drinks on a tray. I walked by the backside and overheard one of them talking about how she was 14 weeks along. When I rounded back, they were talking about the same topic and it was clear to me that she was pregnant. I figured her having 1 drink wasn't a big deal. They ordered their entrees and I went off to handle other tables. About 5 minutes later, they called me over again and asked for another round. At this point I started getting concerned, but I took the order and cheerfully said I'd be right back. This time, I went to the bartender and asked him to make one of them a virgin cocktail. He was confused, but since he's a good friend of mine, I told him to just trust me. A few cocktails later, hers strictly virgin, they started getting rowdy, and Mrs. Pregnant Woman was also getting into it. I figured that since she didn't notice, things were okay. The problem came when I took them their check, and they asked to split the bill at the register. When Mrs. Pregnant Woman got to the counter, I saw her cocktails were marked with virgin. My bartender had edited each in the system for inventory. It was too late for me to edit them back, so I just had her pay, hoping that she wouldn't look at the receipt. They all thanked me and left, leaving a generous tip in the process. They were talking in the parking lot for the next short while, presumably waiting for an Uber. Several minutes later Mrs. Pregnant Woman came back and asked what virgin on the receipt meant. I fessed up that it meant non-alcoholic. She blank stared me for a few seconds and then asked if she had ordered a non-alcoholic cocktail. I said no, but told her that I assumed she wanted one seeing as she was pregnant. It was a lame lie and I'll admit it, but she looked me in the eye and asked me to return her part of the tip. I did so. Then she talked to my manager. My manager took me into her office and literally shrieked at me until hoarse. I stood my ground and told her that I'm not going to be responsible for FAS. She told me that she was taking me off the calendar until she decided what to do with me. She also informed me that I could get the restaurant in serious trouble for discrimination. And upon examination of my state's laws, she is correct. But when I talked to my mother and father about it tonight, they told me that they understood my position. The entire staff at the restaurant is against me and I think that I'm going to call in and tell my manager that I quit. But I still feel in the right here. My boyfriend and I have been together for 2 years now. Every year at the end of summer, my boyfriend's family has a beach trip. They have a cute cottage that they go to visit a few times a year. Last year I was unable to join, but this year I was able to make it. I've met his family before many times and we get along well, so I was looking forward to it. While I was packing, I was sure to include nicer dresses in case we went out and even included a more modest bikini than I would usually wear. This one is still a bikini, but is full coverage unlike my others. I know his family can be a little more conservative, so I kept that in mind when packing. I even went over everything I packed with my boyfriend. On the trip was my BF and I, his younger brother, his older brother, his sister-in-law, and his parents. The first day went by really well. Our flight didn't have any issues, we unpacked, got settled, and all went out for dinner. The next day we had planned to go out on the boat. So I put on my bikini and had a cover up. No one said anything to me as we were leaving, or even when we were on the boat. I spent the whole day in my bikini without a single comment. It wasn't until that night I realized people had an issue with it. We were all drinking on the boat, with the exception of my BF's sister-in-law because she's pregnant. And we continued drinking when we got back. So after dinner, we were all pretty wasted. When we were talking about our time on the boat, my BF's dad made a comment about how everyone was staring at me because of my slutty bikini. I was embarrassed and just laughed it off, but then everyone else chimed in to comment on it. His mom laughed and said it was fine, that she would wear nothing if she were young again. But then his younger brother said that I basically was wearing nothing. I defended myself and said it was the most conservative suit I had. And then his older brother said that it didn't leave anything to the imagination. And that if he were single he would have tried to steal me away. That comment made me pretty uncomfortable, and I could tell it made his wife uncomfortable too. I asked if she would wear bikinis on the trip and my BF's dad interrupted and said that she did, but it was different. My BF just laughed along with all of this, didn't even see anything wrong with it. When I told him to say something, he said that I did look like I was trying to get dick down. Well, that comment was the last straw. I went to our room. I wanted to leave early after all that. But we only had a few days, so I just pushed it in the back of my mind and kept to myself the rest of our trip. I know they were just joking, but what they said really bothered me and made me feel uncomfortable. I'm not sure why my BF doesn't get that. He just keeps saying that they were joking around. But it obviously wasn't very funny to me, so now he's saying I ruined the trip by moping around the rest of the time. University is starting back soon, so many of my friends started moving back to town. I am 17 female, live in a house with 5 friends. I wasn't born in the UK but moved here with my parents when I was 17. We come from another European country, so I speak my native language, English, which is far from perfect. I've been learning Spanish and English since I was little, and my Spanish is better than my English. I don't have an obvious accent in English, people just assume that I am Canadian. We had a small party on Saturday and one friend brought his new girlfriend, Jess. Jess 20, and she's the reason why I am posting here. Jess made sure to let everyone know that she's a polyglot and speaks multiple languages. I was obviously impressed. I study modern languages, meaning that I'm learning Italian and German on top of Spanish. And obviously I asked what languages she speaks: Spanish, Japanese, Arabic, my native language, German, Korean, and French. I told her how impressed I was and carried on with my evening. I had a short phone call with my mom, whom I obviously speak to in my native tongue, and I went out of the house to talk to her. Jess was out in the garden and heard my conversation, and she corrected me on my pronunciation. I told her that she was in the wrong, and she insisted that she knows better. I didn't fancy getting into any arguments, so I ignored her and went back inside saying whatever. Later, I bumped my head and swore loudly in Spanish. I tend to code switch a lot when drunk, and she corrected my pronunciation, which was funny because it was her who was incorrect. I ignored her again. A while later I wanted my friend, who is from Spain, to hand me something, but I forgot how it's called in English. So I said, "Hand me Spanish word, please," knowing my friend would understand. Jess decided to correct me again, using completely incorrect word. My friend and I looked at each other, and me being drunk, I lost any self-control I had. I spoke to Jess in Spanish asking her what the hell she thinks she's doing. And she looked at me telling me that my Spanish was so wrong that she didn't understand a word. It wasn't, but okay. So I told her the same thing in my native tongue. To which she replied with the same thing. I laughed at her and told her it's my native language and she really shouldn't lie about being a polyglot and correcting people when she doesn't actually speak those languages. She was fuming. She tried to grab her boyfriend's hand and leave with him, but he was too drunk to care and just said, "Told you to stop lying." I don't know how she got my number, but she called me this morning screaming what an asshole I am to humiliate her like that, and if she knew I spoke the language, she wouldn't have corrected me. I do feel bad now. I realize how humiliating this must have been for her, but on the other hand, she shouldn't have been lying. I'm a 19-year-old F with 6 older siblings. My parents spent most of my childhood spending money they didn't have on my siblings, so by the time I hit my teenage years, I realized I was probably going to have to fend for myself financially when I turn 18. I started babysitting and doing odd jobs around my neighborhood when I was 14, and eventually got part-time jobs during the school year. By the time I was 16, I was working 3 jobs in the summer and 2 in addition to school. When my parents told me they couldn't pay for college, I'd already earned enough, along with scholarships, to be able to put myself through college and have plenty left over. I've continued to work during the school year, and have been able to make money during quarantine by tutoring online. The issue began a few months ago, when my eldest sister got married. My parents spent 30 grand on her wedding, taking out a second mortgage to do so. To make matters worse, my dad was furloughed 6 days after the wedding. They'd effectively dug themselves into a hole they couldn't get out of. 2 weeks ago, my mom texted me for the first time since the wedding. She didn't say hi, ask how I was, or make any small talk. She just said, "Your dad and I need a favor. When can we call you?" I'd expected this. None of my elder siblings are doing well financially, and they've exhausted all other loan options, both from family and the bank. I figured they would text me, ask me to loan them a few thousand, and promise to pay it back when they could figure things out. I was absolutely willing to pitch in a few thousand, and had even considered giving them some of my tutoring jobs so they could make some extra cash. I was not, however, expecting them to demand I give them all the money, close to $40,000. I'd made from the ages of 14 to 18. The exact statement my mom had made was, "You made that money under our roof. We were the ones who allowed you to work, so you only have it because of us anyway. We bought you food and clothes for 18 years. That money is only a fraction of what you owe us," and so on. I said that food, clothes, and shelter were the very minimum. It's what they signed up for when they chose to become parents. I didn't ask for any of it, etc. They responded by telling me that if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have the life I have today. I said they were being ridiculous, and hung up. Since that day, both, along with two of my siblings, have continuously hounded me about giving them what is rightfully theirs. My siblings, who have never been asked to give them money, are still professing that it's my job as their kid to take care of them. I told them they wouldn't see a cent of my hard-earned money, and have no right to make such a request. I'm torn. I feel awful for refusing to help them out, but on the other hand, this was their fault. I feel I shouldn't be responsible for fixing their mess.